This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. You know, there are a lot of schools that people talk about Purim, but people overlook the main skula. The main skula, Chasam Sofer writes that anyone who has a seder in between the Kriyas HaMegillah Shel Laila, the Kriyas HaMegillah Shel Yom, Muftach Lo Yishu Ben Olam Haba. So if you want to get the skula, you can hear the Megillah again, you know? Then you'll be Zoicha. L'maisa, there's a question, what's pshat in the skula? What's pshat that somebody who learns Torah between Megillah Shel Laila and Megillah Shel Yom, Muftach Lo Yishu Ben Olam Haba? Chasam Sofer says he doesn't know. He has a tradition from his Rabbi, who has a tradition from the Shev Yaakov. But he writes, this is a Kabbalah that he has. I want to share with you a very important question on the Megillah. There's a question of the Baal Nesivos HaMishpat. Nesivos HaMishpat wrote a commentary on the Megillah called Megillah Sesarim, and he points out that there is a fundamental difference between the mitzvahs Hayoim on Purim as any other day, any other Yom Tov. So for example, Pesach, you have many mitzvahs Hayom, you have Matzah, you have Haggadah Shel Pesach, you have many mitzvahs, you have Maror, you have Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. All the mitzvahs of Pesach, every last one is Bein Adam LaMakayim. You come to the Yom Tov of Sukkot, you have the mitzvah of Sukkah, you have the mitzvah of Daled Minim, every last mitzvah is Bein Adam LaMakayim. And that's true for every single Yom Tov. There are no mitzvahs on any Yom Tov that are Bein Adam LaChavera. And yet when it comes to the mitzvah of Purim, aside from Mikra Megillah, all the mitzvahs seem to be Bein Adam LaChavera. Yeah, Matas of Yonim, yeah, Mishlach Manos. Why has Purim been formulated so fundamentally different than any other Yom Tov? Every single Yom Tov, the purpose is to connect with the Rebbeinu Shalom. There are 0 mitzvahs Bein Adam LaChavera. Every single mitzvah is Bein Adam LaMakam. So the Nesivos wants to know, why is Purim different? Also very interesting, you know, there's they're Moinei HaMitzvahs. So the different Rishonim, different Ka'onim speak about, we have a tradition based on the last blot in Masechta Makos, that there's 613 mitzvahs. By the way, not everybody agrees to that. The Ramban Shita is that Tzadas Yachid, others may hold there more than 613 mitzvahs. But there is Messiah and Klal Yisrael 613 mitzvahs, and 7 mitzvahs D'Rabbanan. A total of 620 Kesar. That's why there are 620 letters in the Asar Sadibros, Kaminyan Kesar, 613 mitzvahs D'Oraisa, 7 mitzvahs D'Rabbanan. In fact, the last 3 letters, Asher L'Reyecha, they correspond to the 7 mitzvahs D'Rabbanan. Okay, that's what the Baal HaTurim points out. The question is, all the Moinei HaMitzvahs, when they count the mitzvahs D'Rabbanan, so you have Mikra Megillah, you have Mishlach Manos, you have Matanos Av Yonim, you have Sudas Purim, they all count it as one mitzvah. They don't count it as 7 different mitzvahs. Question is, why? Why would it be one mitzvah? It's completely different mitzvahs. Why would they count Matanos Av Yonim or Mishlach Manos or Mikra Megillah as one mitzvah? They should be counted as 4 separate mitzvahs. Yet they all unanimously count the 7 mitzvahs D'Rabbanan as one big mitzvah. Shaila is, what's the reason for that? So I'm going to share with you tremendous Chasam Sofer in the Drashos Chasam Sofer, page Kuf Chav Gimel in the first Chelak. He says, if you think about Yisoima Me'avim, Esther had no father or mother, and some Sofer says that's why she was called Esther. She was completely hidden. Mordechai was the Rosh Sanhedrin, and he's the Gadol Hadar, and he should go out of his way. Basically, how did he spend his life? He devoted his life to take care of an orphan girl. He didn't care about his own honor. He took her as a daughter, like the pupil of his eye. He says, Kigam acharei, even after she was kidnapped, Hishkim v'harev leida shlema ma'yasaba. He would wake up early every single morning to take care of her, to find out about her welfare. So Chasam Sofer says, if you want to know what was the zchus that brought about the salvation in time of Purim, it was the Mesiras Nefesh of Mordechai, that he went out of his way to be Meiser Nefesh, to take care of an orphan girl who had no father, no mother, and it was certainly beneath his own personal dignity. He's the Rosh Sanhedrin, he's the Gadol Hadar. For him to do such a thing was the predominant, the seminal zchus that brought about the salvation of Purim. He says, also another explanation, when we find that Mordechai kept him going back and forth, Bashar HaMelech, It doesn't say B'shar HaMelech Achashverosh, it says B'shar HaMelech. That implies he was passing by the gate of the king of the world. Ki dafak ba'da sharei rachamei shamayim. He would bang down the gates of heaven to daven for her welfare, that she shouldn't be harmed, she shouldn't be hurt, she shouldn't be violated. Uvizchus zeh, says the Chasam Sofer, the salvation of Purim occurred. Then he says something very interesting. We know that there's a difference between Megillas Esther, Mezuzah, and Sefer Torah. Technically speaking, Sefer Torah does not need sirtut. You don't necessarily need the lines that we have. However, a mezuzah does need the lines, and Megillas Esther does need the lines, and the Gemara darshans it, Divrei Shalom ve'emes, ke'amida shel Torah, like the truth of the Torah, that Megillah needs sirtut like mezuzah. So Tosfos in Masechta Gittin asks, why would mezuzah be called the truth of the Torah, as opposed to what? The rest of the Torah is not the truth. Why would mezuzah be referred to as the truth of the Torah? And why is the Megillah being compared to a mezuzah? What's this analogy? We learn out Hilchos Megillah from Hilchos Mezuzah. Why are we comparing Hilchos Megillah to Hilchos Mezuzah? So the Chasam Sofer, Kedarkoi B'Kodesh, says a davar nifla. Anybody's familiar with the writings of Chasam Sofer? Probably the main idea in the writings of the Chasam Sofer is the importance of Harbatzas Torah. It's written in the Hakdama of the Chasam Sofer that he was makbid gamor, that he did not let a day of his life go by without Harbatzas Torah. Chasam Sofer was makbid on Harbatzas Torah. Even on Tisha B'Av, even on Yom Kippur, he would teach the Talmidim Hilchas Avodah, he would teach the Talmidim, whatever was relevant to the time, he was makbid, as the main obligation of life is to be maratar or to facilitate it. It's very well known and widespread in the writings of the Chasam Sofer. Memela, he says, if you want your Torah to be Torah la'amitai, Chasam Sofer says, in other words, you should learn, very nice you're learning, but if you want your Torah to be true, and what are the two main mitzvahs in Judaism? We mentioned this many times. Aleph, Bina, Gemal, Dalim. Torah and Chesed. These are the two ikarim. If you want your Chesed to be true, so you need to facilitate and fuse the two together. Torah and Chesed together. What is Torah and Chesed together? To teach Torah to Talmidim and to facilitate the teaching of Torah to Talmidim, but combined with being native to them for their personal needs. In other words, not enough to facilitate teaching Torah, but you have to also care for the needs of the Talmidim, their personal needs, their parnasa and their achila. That is a Torah which is Torah la'amitai and Chesed la'amitai. From where do we see the importance? Now, Chasam Sofer adds, a Rebbe has to be willing to go teach Torah to Talmidim to the extent that if it's not comfortable for the Talmud in the city of the Rebbe, and the Talmud needs to go to another city, the Rebbe needs to go into Golus with the Talmud. From where do we learn that a Rebbe has to have the self-sacrifice to go out and be Marvitz Torah to Talmidim, even if it's not comfortable for the Rebbe, and go out and go into Golus with the Talmud? We learn that from Mezuzah. Because here the ultimate Rebbe, the Melamei Torah La'ama Yisrael, leaves the Shamayim, Ushmei Shamayim, and comes down and stands outside of a person's door, protecting the person and caring for the person's needs on the inside. That's the limit of Mezuzah. And that's exactly what we see in Megillas Esther, where Mordechai went out of his way to be Moiser Nefesh for his Talmidah, Esther. It's an interesting thing. You usually think of Harbatzas Torah to men, but here the Rosh Sanhedrin was Moiser Nefesh to take care of this Yisoima, and that is the exact limud of Mezuzah. I want to share with you just one Targum on the Megillah, Oyam B'Noira, the Targum Sheni on the Pasuk. Vayihi Oymein as Hadasa. Unbelievable. I never knew this. Everybody knows that. Where's Mordechai from? You think Mordechai grew up in Bava? Mordechai was from Yerushalayim. Asher Hagla Yerushalayim, right? He was exiled. Says the Targum Sheni, incredibly. He says, V'al oidos Esther hagala higla Mordechai. Mordechai only went into Golus because of Esther. Ki Amar, because Mordechai said, Toiv li laleches begoila. Better I should go into Golus. Ve'ya oimein laEsther, and I should raise Esther miyois be'eretz Yisrael between Eretz Yisrael. So if you want to know, how did Mordechai ever end up in Bavel? He left Eretz Yisrael because he heard that he had a relative who was an orphan, and he said, it's better for me to go into Gullus and give up on my own learning, give up on my own growth, to be able to raise a Jewish girl and protect her, make sure she's not violated. So he followed the lead of the Rebbeinu Shalom, who leaves the Shmei Shamayim and stands outside of his Talmidim's door. See, people don't view the Rebbeinu Shalom as Rabbi. We view him as father, as king, but every day we speak out. One of the main roles of the Rebbeinu Shalom is Hamelame Torah La'ama Yisrael. In fact, the Gemara in Kedushin says that when the Rebbeinu Shalom gives us food, it's an example of Rabbi Shamaychal al Kvoidoi Kvoidoi Macha. Rabbi, do we view Rebbeinu Shalom as a Rabbi? Yes. All the Torah we learn is through the Siyata D'Shema of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So the Rebbeinu Shalom stands outside of our doors, fulfilling the inyan that have a Goyle L'Makam Torah. You have to go into Golos to be able to facilitate Limud Torah. That was the limud of Mordechai. That is why the halacha of Megillah is patterned after mezuzah. Because the ikar zuchus of Megillah Esther is that Mordechai went into Golos to be able to raise a student. So therefore, says the Chasam Sofer, the main Persume Nisa of Megillah Esther is the pasuk Vayehi Oimein Es Hadasa. So I just saw they came out with a kunshas of Rabbi Rucham Olshen, Rashiva of Lakewood. So he says it could be that the reason why, it's interesting, the Mizrahi asks, why is Megillah and Mishlach Manos and Matas Avyanim listed as one mitzvah? He says, because they're all part of Persume Nisa. So yes, how is Mishlach Manos part of Persume Nisa? How is Matas Avyanim part of Persume Nisa? But based on what we're saying, the main Zuchos of Megillah Esther was the Chesed and Tzedakah of Mordechai Tzaddik. In order to bring that out, in order to illustrate that, Chazal instituted different than every other Yom Tif, like the Nesivas asks. The Nesivas asks, every Yom Tif, they're mitzvahs bein adam la'makam. This is the only Yom Tif that you have mitzvahs bein adam la'chavera. Why? It's to remember, to recall, the main zechus of Mordechai was that he was meitiv, chesed, u'tzedakah to Esther. And Memela, all of the mitzvahs hayom are to bring out and to remind us of the zechus of Mordechai HaTzadik, which he learned to emulate from the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, who is Shomer Dalsois Yisrael. And we know that we could just add that the name Shakai, which is very important in terms of being able to destroy Haman, be able to destroy the Nachash. After all, we find that when Moshe Rabbeinu had a problem with that snake in Parashat Shemos, Hashem said, Shlach Yadcha ve'echais biznavai. Listen carefully. So the Ramad Valley says, Shlach Yadcha ve'echais biznavai. Take your yad, Yudalid, and take the end of the snake. What's the last letter of the snake? Nun, Ches, Shin. If you take yad and you grab the shin, you get shakai. From here we learn with the shem shakai, you're able to overcome the nachash. So too in the times of Purim, Mordechai HaTzadik learned the lesson of the mezuzah. The mezuzah is the shem shakai. It's marumaz on the mezuzah through the shem shakai, which, by the way, Mordechai HaTzadik is the gematria shakai. He was able to overcome the nachash, who is Haman himself, and we were zeicha to destroy Amalek, and we should taka be kol oivei Yisrael yichlu karega. B'ez Hashem we should be zeicha to be as Glatstein and Mary Aminu. Amen.
Amen. You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.